Good afternoon and morning to everyone, depending on where you are coming from. As Steph said, I'm Sasha. I am a researcher at Digital Futures Lab, and I'm really excited to be moderating this panel today. For those of you who are new to our work, Digital Futures Lab is an independent interdisciplinary research studio that works towards building pathways to equitable, safe, and sustainable digital futures. We do that through evidence-based research, systematic foresight, and public engagement, which in practice ranges initiatives like examining gender bias in LLM applications in India, conducting capacity building on responsible AI for certain kinds of publics and stakeholders, to conducting landscape surveys of how the integration of AI in critical sectors like healthcare, education, and the judiciary actually pans out. And something that really cuts across a lot of our work on AI is this really central preoccupation with what it really means to operationalize responsible AI. Really looking at it beyond an aspirational framework or a nice to have after an application is considered viable, but really as a contextual action-driven practice. And that question really brings us squarely and repeatedly into the world of India's social sector. The scale of what social sector organizations in India are doing with or without AI is quite substantial. They are filling a gap that formal public systems have not, for whatever reason, been able to fill, and that's in health, in legal aid, in education and livelihoods. And they're doing so across geographies, languages, and varying digital capabilities that really oscillate enormously. And so AI has kind of been this unifying, centralizing factor in the way that social sector organizations are thinking about, how to really speak directly to the inherent challenges of working with such vastness. It offers pathways to scale, to multilingual and multimodal communication, and to the better facilitation of that last mile support. We're already kind of at that moment of active deployment in the social sector. I think we've kind of moved a little bit away from everyone just kind of cautiously talking about it. So the question, as our panel abstract puts it today, then has to kind of move with the social sector in that we're kind of asking, we're not really asking anymore whether or not to build AI, though I think very rightfully so. Some would state that that's still a question worth asking, but really moving to how do we do so responsibly, especially when the costs of getting it wrong fall disproportionately on the most marginalized. And really the conditions in which this is happening are not straightforward and not always conducive actually to what the social sector organizations are trying to build. Funding is not always guaranteed, and it tends to be in these short 6 to 12 month cycles, on top of which these organizations are navigating limited bandwidth, limited in-house technical expertise, and really a complex set of decisions around tools, models, and platforms to use, like whether to build models from scratch or use off-the-shelf models, to fine-tune or to use RAG, to use open source evaluation tools and how to do so, and so on. And that's where the technical partners are so critical to the ecosystem as well, which is why they are part of this conversation. The social sector organizations that are building AI-enabled applications also rely on these external partners, not just to support the build itself, but really to operationalize the safety and responsibility principles that they are committed to in their work. And I think DFL gets to sit quite neatly, and if I may say so, maybe has the easier job of sitting at the interface between these two sides, trying to make that operationalization a bit more seamless and robust where necessary. So a couple of examples of what this has looked like is our Responsible AI Fellowship, which was India's first capacity strengthening program of its kind. We work directly with 14 social impact organizations, some of which are represented on the panel today, pairing them with expert mentors and collating insight that then informed a playbook that we built on responsible AI in the social sector that was really grounded in real decisions that organizations were making at every stage of the application lifecycle. More recently, though, our advisory work with Project Tech for Dev, which is another technical partner in the Indian social sector space, also offered a lot of insights, very deep insight on where responsible AI practice kind of breaks down in reality. And we were able to see this through workshops and through deeper engagements with certain kinds of organizations, like kind of what they were doing to fill in the gaps of those mental models that they had towards responsible AI. And it's really those insights from our Responsible AI Fellowship and from this deeper engagement with organizations that shapes the questions that we'll be putting forward to this panel today. There really is a great deal to learn from the experience in this room, and so I will keep quiet after some time and let them introduce themselves as well. But really, what we're going to be seeing here is how these organizations intentionally grapple with the tensions between scale, the risk of harm, and also accountability. What we'll do with this session is we'll begin with some opening remarks from each of these organizations so that they can provide context to our audience before we move into the moderated discussion. So first off, I'm glad to invite Jigar Doshi to take the floor first. With 15 years of experience in deep learning under his belt, with the last 6 being in AI for social impact, Jigar is the director of machine learning at ArtPark, which is an innovation hub that provides technical advisory and bill support for for-profits, nonprofits, and government. And so really, I think, is able to see the technical operationalization and on-ground experience together. And really looking forward to what you have to say, Jigar, about your work.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, everybody, for the invitation. You can hear me okay, loud enough? Yes, okay, thank you. So my name is Jigar. Maybe just to set context and of what is ArtPark and sort of what we do. So ArtPark is a nonprofit at the Indian Institute of Science, which is, for those not from India, is one of the premier research institute. ArtPark's role is to do translational work, to operationalize it, to scale it. We engage in sort of ecosystem building efforts, and I'll list some there, and also in solution building. So actually building the services. So on the ecosystem side, ArtPark has been working on something called as the Project Wani, which is the largest multilingual speech, audio, text, and video multimodal model that spans all of India, is one of the largest data set of its kind, including 120 languages, 100,000 plus hours of speech and audio. This is open source, and we build models out of it and benchmarks and lots of community activity around it. The other one that we recently started to work on is something called as Calibrate, and maybe we'll get into discussion here, is a tool for evaluating production models, evaluating speech aspects of things, both when you speak and you get a text thing out of it, which is called speech to text model, or when it talks back to you, then it's called the text to speech model. So how do you end-to-end evaluate it? What are the right ways of evaluating it? What are the right metrics? What should you consider? And really, ultimately, enabling the solution holders to decide what aspects of AI are deployable, are safe, and where is the risk, right? Really trying to quantify failure modes and risks and decide what to roll out or what to work on more. In addition to that, we have been part of technical advisory to Meta and Nudge's grant to about 10 or 12 nonprofits. So I sit on that technical advisory committee, helping maybe 10 or 12 nonprofits on spanning from education, health, livelihood, disability, and stuff like this. So we kind of get to see a sampling through our ecosystem work. On the solution building side, one of our more mature work is with Arman. Amrita will come next on that, which is chatbot for healthcare workers. We also work on sort of capacity building in general. So we have been thinking about AI curriculum, AI-based trainers for for mental health counselors, or really training them up to being a mental health counselor. And really thinking about what it means to have curriculums and structured learning with AI. And finally, we also sort of think about a lot of productivity aspects of things. So, for example, lots of public health system have forms that they have to fill out. So we are working on voice-based form filling. So you can just kind of dictate and stay in flow, stay with your beneficiary while the AI can do the paperwork. And finally, ARTPAC has also been working on sort of epidemiological modeling. So we do predictions of viral outbreaks of dengue or TB. Also predicting is this heat wave season. I know Steph doesn't have sun. We have too much sun. So there's lots of heat wave problems. So we also do heat wave predictions and help the state mitigate some of the losses due to that. So this is sort of our context. Really, I think thinking about responsible AI in many ways is not different from responsible tech. Doing it right, doing it with your beneficiary, always in the loop. And one thing I want to say, and I'll end it here, is there is no, of course, the first question, like Sasha said, first question should be, do we want AI, right? And if no is a likely answer, then you don't need and avoid it. But if you do, then I think thinking about it rigorously in a scientifically experimental mindset, really not overgeneralizing that it's a panacea or it's all bad, but really thinking about the nuance of the current AI technology and the current problems and what solutions we have, and trying to make it more precise and hence perhaps go more slow, go more deliberate along the way. So I'll just pause here and really looking forward to our discussion here today. Over to you, Sasha.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jigar, for really giving us that overview of what Art Park does. And I think it really squarely sits amongst all of these things that kind of feed into each other, like solution building, ecosystem building, capacity building. And I really want to come back to I think before we go on to the next speaker, to the point that you made about, the question of whether or not AI is necessary. Just as a, I don't know, like kind of comment because of where you sit in the ecosystem, how has that conversation looked like for you as you interface with organizations that come to you for that support, or when you're working with government, who of course is kind of advocating for like AI being the thing that we kind of push for social good? Because I think within the organizations itself there seems to be a thing of like, okay, maybe it's not the best thing, but like grant funder requirements, government partnership requirements kind of push towards that. So I'm curious to know how, as Artpark sits in that kind of in between of everything, how do you kind of navigate that conversation between stakeholders?
Should I answer, or do you want to?
And of course, please, and then we can move on to our next.
Okay. So I'll keep it short. This is a longer conversation, as you can imagine. So, I mean, I've been thinking about AI, just as my intro said, for a very long time, and for a very long time, AI was sort of brushed out of the room, if I can put it metaphorically. Now the excitement is good, but I think sometimes it gets too sort of what is the thing, square peg in the round hole kind of issues, where and at least a lot of times we will say, look, AI is not necessary. And generally, I think depending on who you're speaking to, you can make several different kinds of arguments. One is AI is expensive. So you can always convince them to not use AI and use traditional software, because ultimately it's trying to solve a particular problem. When deterministic software or human process, doesn't even have to be software, is necessary, one should rely on that. But generally, AI comes into picture when you start thinking about scale. As soon as you start thinking about scale and trying to reach a larger set of population, India is massive. Then somehow AI comes into picture, and that there is many justifications for AI. So then there is a nuanced conversation of where is the right lever. Can we take an experimental approach? Can we measure before we scale? And as we scale, hopefully we discover problems along the way. So I'll just pause here. There's a lot to say on this, but hopefully,
Definitely. And I think this is a perfect segue into the speakers from the organizations that have to grapple with this exact question of scale. It's too expensive. It's like, is it efficient to do this? Is it not? So I would now like to invite Amrita, who is Director of Product and Innovation at Arman, which, as he mentioned before, is an organization that Art Park has actually worked with. And so I'm hope that there will be some conversation about what that kind of collaboration has looked like and what has born from it, to kind of provide insight on how this kind of partnership can really benefit the social sector ecosystem. But just a little bit about Amrita and Arman. At Arman, Amrita is responsible for creating a human-centered, data-driven, and evidence-based innovation process across Arman's portfolio of programs in maternal and child health that have served over 70 million women and 500,000 health workers. Amrita, floor is yours.
Thank you, Sasha. I wanted to share some context about the state of maternal and child health in India before I talk about Arman and our AI work. So, 2 women die in childbirth every hour in India, and for every woman who dies, 20 more suffer lifelong complications. And 2 children under the age of 5 die every minute in the country, and almost a third of all children under the age of 5 are malnourished. Next slide. Arman is a non-profit that works in maternal and child health with a focus on preventive care. And we run large-scale tech-based programs that broadly fall into 2 buckets. One category of programs is focused on pregnant women, mothers, and children, where we empower women and caregivers with critical preventive care information through pregnancy, infancy, and early childhood, enabling them to seek care in time. And the second category of programs is focused on health workers and health systems, where we train and support health workers to provide better quality of care with an emphasis on the timely detection and proper management of high risk conditions. Next slide. So Arman, as I mentioned, has many programs. Some of our programs are with the National Ministry of Health. We have programs we run with state governments, some programs that we run with municipal corporations as well. So we've reached over 72 million women and children and over 500,000 health workers through our programs. Next slide. Arman has been building and deploying AI solutions at scale for 3 or 4 years now. And our earlier AI work was more in the predictive modeling realm. We've also done some pilots to optimally allocate limited resources. For example, predicting what the best time slot to call beneficiaries is for a large-scale maternal messaging program. But more recently, a lot of our work has used generative AI, and this is the work that we've been doing with Art Park as well. So we use chatbots to provide personalized information, learning support, and hand-holding to both of our target users, mothers and caregivers, as well as health workers. Next slide. And the product or solution that I'm going to focus on today is a knowledge assistant we've built for frontline health workers. One cadre of health workers called ANMs or auxiliary nurse midwives. ANMs are the first line of care for most families in rural and remote areas in India. There are about 150,000 ANMs in the country, each one catering to a population of 3 to 5,000. And we have a high risk pregnancy program through which we train health workers of different cadres in the better management of high risk pregnancy. But what we saw was that classroom training alone is not sufficient. Classroom training often is generic, it's one time, it's one size fits all. And whatever health workers learn in the classroom, that knowledge degrades over time. What was really necessary to prevent complications and deaths is better point of care support in addition to proper training. That's why we decided to build a knowledge assistant. So this is a multilingual, multimodal chatbot with a human in the loop that answers questions from ANMs about high-risk pregnancies and antenatal care, and it provides a channel for continuous learning and support. Next slide. Just a quick overview of the features. So we have a digital onboarding. So it's a multimedia tutorial with step-by-step instructions on how to use the product, the value a user can expect from it, the use cases in which they can turn to this, as well as safety reminders that this is an AI product. The product itself is multilingual, multimodal, so users can ask questions either as text or through voice messages. We decided to build this on WhatsApp because health workers in India already use 6 to 8 different apps and spend 2 hours doing digital data entry. So there's a lot of fatigue with installing new apps. So we decided to go to a platform that they already use, which in this case is WhatsApp. We also have a feedback prompt every answer. If the user is not satisfied with the response, or if the question itself is out of scope or too complex, those questions get escalated to a human in the loop. Uh, Next slide. I'll just speed through this. This is just to tell you that we followed an iterative approach, and it took us over a year and a half of experiments, user research, evaluation before we rolled out a pilot. And we've scaled up from a pilot with 100 ANMs to now over 8,000 users in about a year and a half. So the product currently supports 3 languages. It's available in 3 states. 8,000 ANM serve about 1 million pregnant women. And we do continuous user research and discovery to enhance the product in different ways. And the last slide. So these are some general principles that we follow for our AI projects. The first one, builds upon what Jigar said. We pick problems rooted in user and program needs. So it's very much a problem first, user first approach, and not an AI first or tech centered approach. We design for safety and harm prevention, inclusivity, transparency. We have a responsible data policy which informs all the work we do. All our teams are interdisciplinary, and we collaborate with AI organizations such as ArtPark. And what you've also seen through the presentation is that we take a deliberate iterative approach where we start with small studies and pilots and then scale up in a phase-wise manner. That's all for now, and look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Amrita. I think I'm going to do this thing where people give their opening remarks, and I'm just going to follow up on something and then continue on the conversation that way. Lots that you've touched on, Amrita, that I think the rest of the other speakers who at these social impact organizations will be able to speak to as well. But I just wanted to pick up on the comment that you made about how the ANM chatbot that you are rolling out today took over a year and a half of experimentation, and I think that really speaks to what Jigar was talking about too, about this thing of it's expensive, the idea of scaling, the idea of rolling out immediately, different stakeholders in the ecosystem having different priorities for when things should go out, how fast they should go out. I just a sort of overview or reflection of that year and a half that you were building this chatbot. When people when we think of incubator programs that expect people to come up with pilots in 3 to 4 months and and trying to build something, do you think at all that there's any sort of shortcut to this, or if there's and this might be a leading question in a way, if there's any shortcut to this, if this is in fact a year and a half of experimentation is what it takes to build something that you can conclusively say is going to be safe, is able to qualify certain safety threshold before it's able to really go out at scale. So I was just wondering if you could reflect on that and give us your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, let me start off by saying if we did it now, it will not take 1.5 years because the underlying tech itself is much better. And not just because we know more, not because we know better, but AI models themselves are much better. They did not meet our safety thresholds earlier. But we spent some time trying to figure out the right use case as well. because we knew we wanted to do something with AI, but we wanted to pick the right use case. So in this case, it was a blend of meeting the intersection of finding the intersection of what is now possible with what is really needed, right? So we did start off with an idea of wanting to explore using Gen AI, and we had learned that classroom training was insufficient because our monitoring and evaluation team does periodic knowledge assessments, and we saw that there was a gain in knowledge right after classroom training, but in 3 months health workers were back to their pre-training levels, right? So there was a gap that we observed. And in fact, our program team had tried a WhatsApp based helpline with medical trainers who were responding. So there was no AI in the picture at all. But that product did not work at all. Because when health workers were first told about the service, they tried sending a few sample questions, and medical trainers who already fairly overworked, when they saw those questions, they thought the questions were too straightforward, too basic, very theoretical. So they did not prioritize responding to those questions. They would often respond hours or even days later. And then this entire system went into a bit of a vicious cycle where health workers did not trust the system. They didn't think it was useful because they didn't get instant answers. So they would only send low quality questions, which did not incentivize the medical trainers to take the service seriously either. Right, so it took us some conversation, some deep diving to even identify that this was the right use case. Then it took us time to curate the right knowledge base because we knew we didn't want the system to pull answers from the internet. The knowledge base had to be clinically validated. It had to be locally relevant as well and contextual. So curating the knowledge base took some time. We did several rounds of evaluation, and we had to come up with an evaluation rubric as well. Because 2 3 years ago there wasn't a clear understanding of what should an AI system do and how do you measure if it's safe, right? And then we did lots of rounds of experiments. So now we have a playbook for how this is to be done. I would still not trust somebody who says that this entire journey could be completed in a few months or in a month or in 6 weeks, but probably not 1.5 years. Sasha, you're on mute.
Thank you for that. I think this idea of like the tech also has just kind of sped past as far as capability is concerned. I think Jigar, you also mentioned this in a blog post that you had shared about how organizations are still like thinking about fine tuning, thinking about RAG at a time when like the capability of the model itself maybe does not require that to be the way in which we like think about it, which are kind of resource intensive processes of thinking about like responsibility and safety, right? So we'll definitely come back to that in some way in the conversation. But also just kind of go off of this point of that you mentioned, Amrita, of like overburden in the system. I think our next speaker will probably be able to speak to that and the sort of work that they're doing to kind of mitigate that in the legal space. So I now invite Asta Khurana, the founding designer at Adalat AI, a legal tech nonprofit building AI tools for the Indian judiciary to eliminate delays, streamline workflows, and ensure timely justice for all. Her work focuses on making AI practical and trustworthy in low-tech, high-stakes environments where most design playbooks don't apply. Asa, over to you.
Thank you, Sasha, for that intro. Hi, everyone. I am the founding product designer and now the design lead at Adalat AI. Just for our global audience, Adalat means courts in a lot of Indian languages, and AI is AI, so that's how Adalat AI came to be. We build software, AI-powered software for our courtrooms. To give you a sense of the problem that we're dealing with, India has about 50 million pending cases right now, and at our current judicial capacity, it's going to take us about 300 years to clear that. So obviously, it's not like one clog in the system that's causing this problem. It's very multifaceted. There's not one solution that we're trying to build for, and there's a lot of hidden human cost that comes with it. It's not just delays in workflows or delays in economics, right? It's every court case is connected to one or many human lives behind it. India's prison population comprises of about 70% under trial under trial population essentially. So they are basically waiting for a hearing date because of how undercapacitated we are. That's the problem we are trying to tackle at Adalat AI. Our approach has mostly been to focus on the clerical bottlenecks instead of like the generative AI solutions. Essentially, we consider ourselves the plumbers of this system because of how many clerical problems the system faces because of how paper based everything is. If you enter a district courtroom right now, there you'll notice stacks of paper. The smell of paper kind of lingers in the air, and that's how focused on writing everything by hand we are. And one of the reasons for that is the lack of skilled stenographers in India, and that's the first problem that we decided to go in with. We run our company very much like a tech startup, not a non-profit organization, in the terms that we have a very lean, very qualified tech team behind the solutions that we're trying to build. And our GTC, which is go to code strategy, is very operations and product led, a combination of the two. Some of the solutions that we're working on currently, obviously, there's the multilingual transcription software for courtrooms. We are also working on a case management module. We recently launched our first paperless court with the Sikkim High Court, which we're very, very proud of. And then the last one is, which is my personal favorite, is a WhatsApp chatbot for litigants to make the system more accessible for the general public. Responsible AI for us very much connects to human in the loop approach, not just for designing but also for building our models. Because of the space that we are in, our models have to be very contextually accurate, and to build that contextual awareness in the models, we have a fine tuning pipeline essentially that relies heavily on our in-house lawyers, which I'm going to talk a lot about during this panel. We'll keep coming back to the concept of having lawyers instead of PMs in a tech team. So yeah, and then the other thing that has worked very much in our favor is working with the system. So co-designing with the system, trying to leverage the existing models, existing constraints, and not letting them get in the way, but kind of using them to inform how we build tech. I'm going to stop here, and I think we can talk more about it in the panel coming forward.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, Asta. I think the point about human in the loop is, I think, something that cuts across like all the organizations. So we'll definitely touch on that in the larger panel. But something that I wanted to come back to that you said, and the way that you described kind of the scene of the legal system in India, is that it is such a tangible, paper heavy sort of system, right? And you're here trying to kind of like optimize for digitization, go paperless, go like keep these systems kind of online on software. And something you mentioned about co-designing with the system, I was wondering if you could give us like an example or of a flavor of what that actually looks like from some of like either the capacity building work that you've done or the sort of build work that you've done. Like, how do you try to convince a group of people that have I think worked in a certain way for so long, and that's kind of by precedent of the system itself, to kind of get on board with an idea like this, and that co-design process, which is a really big tenet of responsible AI.
Yeah, so I think the biggest unlock for us was realizing how important having lawyers in the team was. Lawyers are the closest proxies to the justice system that you can get. So our entire operational team is comprised of lawyers who practice in the state, speak their language, have a relationship with the courts already, and then we go from there. They not only do on-ground trainings, they collect feedback from our users very actively. They also, it's a tech reticent, low trust environment, right? Because as you said, there are processes that have been in place for decades now, and we are kind of introducing very high tech technology here, very cutting edge technology. So it's a combination of basically figuring out what the change tolerance is, right? And we do that by leveraging lawyers who are on ground. Lawyers also work as our proxy users internally, so they give us continuous feedback on the model quality, on the product UX decisions that we are taking, on the types of problems that we're trying to focus on. So co-designing doesn't just mean for us that we work directly with judges and stenographers, which we do in some capacity, but their time is so limited that we want to use it very, very intentionally, essentially. And having lawyers as proxies has really, really worked very well for us.
No, thank you so much about that, and it'd be great to see how this compares across the other organizations as well, as far as their human in the loop kind of model is. And this, I think, kind of brings us to our last social impact organization or representative from that organization, but we do have one more speaker after this as well. I would like to invite Tanisha Kedia, who is the product manager at Quest Alliance, which works at the intersection of technology and future skill building to make learning more equitable and relevant, especially for socially and economically vulnerable learners. With a background in psychology, sociology, and cognitive science, she brings a learning-centered lens to questions of how technology can genuinely support decision-making, exploration, and transition to thriving careers. Tanisha, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Asha. I hope I'm audible. Just a quick check. Yeah? All right. Okay. As Sasha has already mentioned, my name is Tanisha and I work with Quest Alliance in the capacity of a product manager. Um, and typically, when as NGO workers we speak about our work, we tend to start with the problem statement or the kind of problems that we're trying to solve. It just kind of helps set the context and give a sense of the lay of the land. So that's what I'll also do. I'd like to start by sharing a paradox that I keep coming back to. India has one of the largest youth populations in the world and a massive skilling ecosystem, over 15,000 industrial training institutes, and millions of young people who are moving through these every year, right? And yet, only a very small percentage of formally trained youth actually transition to formal employment. And as for the most recent data, something I just came across a week ago, a report by India Development Review, it said that 3% of ITI candidates or vocational training candidates were hired in 2020. And that's a jarring statistic, right? 3% of, skilled workforce is entering formal work spaces in India. And that's the world that Quest Alliance has been working in for over 2 decades now. So essentially, we're a non-for-profit. We work across government schools and the skilling ecosystem, both industrial training institutes and vocational training centers. And our work is spread across 12 states in India. And these institutions also are often sometimes the only pathway to skills and livelihoods for young people in the country, specifically young people who come from low income backgrounds. And hence, through our work, we see the same structural gap emerge again and again. And this is the paradox that, I was referring to earlier. On one side, you have educators, trainers who are deeply committed but overstretched, right? And many of these institutions have single trainers who are expected to do curriculum delivery, provide placement support, have administrative load and burden, and are also expected to provide one-on-one training and mentorship and coaching to students. And the numbers could vary from 30 to 300. And also these learners come from varying levels of literacy, varying confidence levels, and digital literacy is also very digital access and literacy both are different and vary across the ecosystem, and the trainers as well have to deal with this kind of diversity. And on the other side, you have learners who are trying to navigate really incredibly high stake decisions, right, with respect to what kind of careers and jobs are available for them, are relevant for them. And a lot of the support that they receive is very limited to in the classroom space. And but however, their reality is fairly different, right? Sometimes this learning and this decision making happens in the classroom. Sometimes it happens at 10 p.m. After I've completed my course, after I've come back home, helped my family with chores. I've probably also done a quick errand. Maybe I'm also a gig worker, working 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours a day. So I wrap all of this up. I come home and then I engage in learning, and that's that moment in time where they require the support the most, and they don't have, or they historically have never had it, right? However, often, like in the recent past, they have been increasingly turning to the internet for support, YouTube, GPT, and other AI systems, right? So it's not like they're not getting the answers that they want to the questions, but these answers are often not contextually very relevant to their realities. You know, a student sitting in rural Odia asking about the labor market, which is contextual to them, is not going to get the right kind of responses from a system that's built in in a totally different part of the world for a totally different user base. And this gap between the formal education system, the kind of uh, you know broken or dispersed support that they get, is what led to the imagination, or is what led to Ask Abhi, which is essentially our AI powered bot, meant to provide learning and career assistance to learners, specifically designed for the skilling ecosystem, to understand the ground realities of the vocational and the industrial ecosystem, understand the context realities of our learners, and also not with the idea to replace trainers, but really about how can they support and enable both trainers and learners in an ecosystem which is quite burdened and structurally not uh, very sound. Yeah, I think from the beginning we also knew that with respect to Ask Abhi, although AI is something that we will get into the nuts and bolts of it, but from the very beginning we kind of knew that this is not just going to be a technology project for us, because these are high stakes environments, and uh, you know uh, if the system gives poor guidance or incorrect guidance, the cost is not going to be borne by us or by a funder, but it's going to be borne by the student themselves. And so the core question for us shaping our work on responsible AI is really about how can we make how can it's not really about whether or not to build a tool, like Sasha said. It's really about how do we build this tool now that is context aware, is really helping learners navigate their realities without inculcating over dependency, over reliance on tools and process. So yeah, I'll just pause there. That's the journey that we've been on, but I guess we'll also speak about this more in detail. Yeah, I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much, Tanisha. And my question to you, I think, based off of what you've just said, I think just in your context setting, you've really made the case for why thinking about safety and responsibility, especially for younger learners, is like really key. I was wondering if you could kind of walk us through a little bit about how you've been approaching sort of safety guardrailing for Ask Abhi, which is something that we have kind of worked on a little bit, but would be great if you could share with the group kind of like the end to end a little bit of that process before we go on to our last speaker.
Sure. I think one of the biggest things we learned early on was that the real risk wasn't about a chatbot giving incorrect information alone, right? It was really about giving correct information in a way that sounded like a decision, or which sounded like a decision has been made for the learner or the user. And that is something that we were very concerned about. So, uh, really our consideration about how we approached guardrails did not come as a structural requirement or like a part of a checklist. It really came from concerns that we had about how our learners are going to engage and use the system, because they are they are a vulnerable set of people who are going to be using the system, right? So it came from genuine concern, and it didn't come as a checklist of, oh, now we have to also ensure that our product is safe to use. And I think that's a great way to start. And so our first principle really became that, right? Ask Abhi, or any AI product, that tool that we build will not decide for our users. It's really going to help scaffold and provide options, maybe surface trade-offs, help with thinking through choices. But the final decision we knew that we always want for our learners to take and for it to stay with them. So I think that is something that came very early on for us. And then as we were going through the process of really defining the use cases, and answering some of the questions of what the tool should and shouldn't do, right, in the process of defining those use cases, I think the guardrails came quite naturally. And yeah, I think the second guardrail that came was as a result of a workshop we did, which I can maybe talk about a little later. But something that came out from there was that emotional framing was very, very important for an AI tool, especially when we're building this for young people, right? And this came because of the emotional patterns that we saw emerging from AI usage amongst young learners, and how AI and careers are heavily associated with emotions like fear, confusion, pressures, things like that. So that also made us think about how we want to approach AI, how we want to approach the humanness side of AI. How do we want to ensure that the tonality of the tool that we're building, all of that is also kind of taking into consideration the lived realities and the emotional readiness of our learners, and not just the tech literacy and the digital literacy and readiness, right? So emotional literacy also became emotional readiness became like a central discussion point. um, and I think the third guardrail was around decision ambiguity, and this is something that came out as a result of, I think, a lot of conversations, Sasha, that we had around responsible use of AI and guardrails, and chalking those out, right, as part of the AI cohort. And that really helped, because while care, consideration, value system is in generally in Quest's DNA, because of the kind of learners and communities we work with, it doesn't automatically translate into product decisions, right? So some kind of structure actually helps. So we did look at those templates, etc., existing literature that would support in creating like more rule based guardrails, not just guardrails that are based on research and which are more like uh, difficult to operationalize. But once we had our understanding of absolute must haves and good to haves, then we translated them into actual operational rules that could be used by the team to build a product that is ensuring that these guardrails are met. Yeah, so decision ambiguity, the example that I was sharing was really about how do we ensure, uh, again, that our learners are not being pushed to the brink of over reliance and just accepting things that is being told to them, but instead how do we push for uh, conversational AI, and how do we push for uh, more thinking, reasoning, and a lot of this was embedded in our behavioral and intelligence architecture at the get go, and that was also something that we said we will strongly test and evaluate, and that became another guardrail for us. How do we ensure that identity level questions especially are not something that are answered by the AI, but really supported by just maybe nudges, eventually understood and decided upon by learners. So yeah, and honestly, I would also like to say that the guardrails are still evolving, and I think one of the hardest questions, or one of the key open questions that we're still sitting with, is how do you detect emotional context without over interpreting users or without over analyzing existing data, right? And this is something that we're still sitting with. And how do we understand the nuances of like a learner asking which trades has good jobs? How do we understand this question at face value? It could just be information seeking, or it could be a person who's extremely in need or desperate to find a job in their locality and is the only earning member of their family. And how do we detect those those emotional contexts of our learners and provide support there? So I think that's an open question, and we're still kind of figuring that out. Yeah, I'd pause there.
No, thank you so much, Tanisha. I think that was a really comprehensive look at guardrailing. And I liked how you kind of approached it, not just from like your kind of normal responsible AI framework of like transparency, accountability. It was like very, very rooted to your learner's context and the application that you're building. And now I would like to invite our last speaker, who I think also has like a really community-oriented feminist lens towards safety and how to operationalize that in technology and in AI specifically. So to round us off, I would now like to invite Dr. Barish Agarwal, Research Development and Grant Specialist at Tattle Civic Technologies, who brings a feminist and disability justice lens to Tattle's work of building tools and data sets to understand and respond to inaccurate and harmful content. Barish, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Sasha. So, just a little context about what Tattle does, and also the conversations have set this up so beautifully. So, Tattle is a community of researchers, artists, developers who have been building open source tools and data sets to combat online harm in the forms of misinformation and gender-based violence, right? And this has sort of naturally led us to thinking about AI safety, thinking about how do we really operationalize responsible AI. Right? And so currently, Tattle has been working with Project Tech for Dev, which is something Sasha had also mentioned earlier. And we had this long sort of collaboration where we were working with grassroots NGOs to understand their um, nascent kind of in pilot stage AI use cases, right? And what has been coming out of this project and what's been developed out of this project is customizable safety guardrails, which are sort of addressing kind of six big um, kind of concerns of safety and responsibility and like predictable responses from AI use cases, as well as developing like a methodology that will that can be replicable and that will allow sort of periodic bespoke manual evaluations of AI tools. So the kind of work we are doing is really trying to answer this question of how do we build a method both for research as well as like technical implementation or technical development of guardrails that is easily usable, that is customizable and can be configured by different NGOs and different domains, right? And so our experimentation in this area was based on working with five sort of grassroots NGOs in the healthcare and the education domains, and we looked at both generative AI as well as sort of predictive assessment based tools, right? Um, and so the thing that I kind of want to focus on is that one of the things that we saw, which is a question that I think Jigar had brought up earlier, this question of understanding, do you want to use something that's off the shelf or do you want to build something customizable? And so our entire research on how do you build safety guardrails that are relevant to a multilingual community, that are relevant to a multicultural context, involved doing these experiments, right? And so I'll give you a small example. So one of the early experimentations or sort of analysis on pilot data that we received from one of the NGOs showed that there was leakage of personally identifiable information. And this is obviously a problem that is well known, has been documented. There are, custom guardrails available to address it. But what we noticed was that the PII that was revealed was caste category, right? And that's a very specific kind of relevant category that can cause a lot of harm within the Indian context, right? And how it's revealed and to whom it's revealed has very serious consequences. And that kind of led us to see, okay, what might be other ways that PII or what are the other kinds of personally identifiable information that are risky, that have consequences within the Indian context. And so we basically like took an off the shelf guardrail and we were like, okay, let's test this, let's see if we just add something to it, does it do the work? And then we kind of ran into this issue of, all right, so now we're seeing that there are people are uploading, say, personal like medical reports, or they're uploading images of scans that they've like medical scans and things that they've taken to a bot that may not be we had sort of both use cases where they were uploading these sort of PII documents, both in a bot that was supposed to receive them and a bot that wasn't supposed to receive them, right? And so that is where our experimentation kind of got very, into like, what do these set of problems need as a response, right? And so the kind of PII removal validator that we developed is now addressing a lot of the text-based issues of like caste, location, like religion, ethnic identity. And we've also sort of kept in mind that this should be something that can be developed further, that we can bring in capabilities for images and documents and things like that. And so my purpose in giving you this example is that a lot of what's been discussed by the other organizations really comes down to this, right? Like, what are the nitty gritties and the things that might seem obvious when you talk about them, but like how do you actually operationalize them as when you are sort of implementing um, technical solutions. And so what we found is that there is a very important um, sort of symbiosis between like developing these safety guardrails that are like open source, can be implemented, you can customize them to your domain, you can configure it to the kinds of input modes that you have, and at the same time doing sort of periodic regular evaluations, like having an easy to use sampling method and easy to build on annotation guide as ways to keep this safety process like going and also adapting to new situations that are coming up, to new risks that are coming up and harms, right? And so one of the like sort of other things that we noticed across the different use cases was that when we were using any of these guardrails and we were customizing them to like, okay, Hindi, English, like what other languages um, does this audience use, we were seeing worse performance on Romanized Hindi versus Devanagari script, right? So the script in which Hindi is written is Devanagari, but a lot of times people will write Hindi in English, right? And so this then sort of starts bringing up these questions of, okay, so what are the patterns in language that seem to cause these fails, right? And so the other thing that we've kind of now really been thinking about is, you know, we've got we've got this set of guardrails that are out there, people can use them. We've got a method that we can teach people, do for different NGOs. But how do we make sure that as we move forward, we're still kind of you know we're still staying very attentive to like issues that we haven't noticed yet, right? And so sort of coming back again to this process and not getting as in, and I think this might be I can't find like the best way to put this, but like not getting um complacent on, this is the practice that we've developed and it has worked, but recognizing that it's going to be kind of constantly iterative, right? So I think like just the conversation that's been happening also about, how long does it take to build a safe tool, what does it really take to be conclusively safe? Like I think a lot of that is also sort of Tattle's approach of like, going slower, taking the extra time to do the manual evaluation, to do the sort of conversations with the the staff, the people on the ground, and being like, okay, if we're developing this solution, like, is it really meeting your needs? Like, what else do we need to do? And sort of coming back to it and doing that tinkering. So I'm gonna pause there about, yeah, our sort of approach to safety guardrails. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for that. And I think I have one question for you before we start opening it up to the floor. And I think really going to the evaluation piece, which I think has come out in like everyone's presentation so far. But just to you, Barish, this like this idea of going slow, really being iterative in your approach, really thinking about like the contextualization of harm itself, like the leakage of personally identifying information is egregious in and of itself, but the leaking of caste information in India specifically has this like added layer to it that is very contextual to India, right? And so then to build safety tools or to build process that accounts for like the nuance in the harm itself, it's a really big task. Like as slow as you can go, like it's really accounting for all of these things. So I guess my question to you, and I'm curious also, Jigar, if you could answer after Barish does, like at what point, like do you like how does one approach building these kind of processes and tools where you account for nuance as much as you can, but you realize that you also have to account for the breadth of applications that you're building for, and then there's like a baseline at which all of these organizations are operating, right? So how do you kind of reconcile those two things? So Barish, if you could go first, and then Jigar, if you can kind of chime in after.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a question that we're actually actively still trying to answer, right? But I'll give you sort of some of our in process thoughts about it. And I think one thing there is the sort of approach that we've taken is recognizing that you work with like a few set of issues at a time, right? So even just in our broader process as well, we realized that okay, when we did the first round of analysis, we were like, okay, we're seeing PII as an issue, we're seeing toxicity coming through in slurs, we're seeing toxicity come through with bias, we're seeing the model itself assuming the gender of the person who's speaking. So we're seeing, that kind of bias emerge. There's obviously hallucinations that are happening. There's multiple types of hallucinations. And then there's like the very sort of pertinent question of, is the bot sticking to topic or not? Like, is it able to identify out of scope queries? And so we have to really think, obviously these are also questions, answers determined by project timeline and things like that. But we were also like, how do we do justice to these multi-layered issues? And so we were like, okay, like let's sort of determine, and I think Jigar set this up really well when he was talking about, like what are things that need more sort of digital response rather than an AI response, right? So do you need a more deterministic solution? Do you need a more AI oriented, solution? Maybe there's a problem like toxicity that has both lexical and semantic solutions. So I think when it comes to how much nuance, is enough nuance, and at what point do you deploy? I think the way that we're trying to go about it right now is deploy in sort of small batches and be willing to keep pausing and coming back and doing another round of evaluations, right? So being very being willing for this process to be frustrating, essentially, in that it's not going to be a smooth, like not every organization is going to have the capacity to wait, say, the full 6 months to a year to really do everything thoroughly. Ideal case, yes, I absolutely advocate for that, right? Like, don't go out there until you've really knocked out all of the kinks. But maybe you have like field worker burnout right now, and maybe you're dealing with capacity issues right now. So maybe small batch testing and small batch rolling, and sort of again like thinking about what is a timeline at which you can effectively keep pausing and checking back in. And we've been seeing this as one of the organizations that we worked with. I'm going to share, as in we don't not there's nothing very private about it, but Vigyan Shala is an edtech NGO that has been doing this. They sort of did a pilot, then they ran their bot for a little bit, then they identified there were issues. And so then they were like, let's pull it back for a little while. Let's really only, let it be available to the few core, students that we are working with. And let's make sure that we really get this somewhere, a lot better than where it is right now. And it has shown results, right? The sort of first iteration and then the second iteration and now the third iteration that they're working on has really shown a lot more emotional awareness, a lot more strictness with not answering questions outside of scope. And so I think that there is also, if you have that capacity and if you have those resources, I think there's a lot of merit in doing that as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think this point about like slow deploying in batches, and I think willing for the process to be frustrating. I'm sure all the organizations represented on the panel here can speak to what that sort of iterative process is not like easy in and of itself. But Jigar, I don't know if you had like a comment on this idea of like how much level of nuance or messiness or kink can you account for in the beginning before you realize like something has to be rolled out, especially as you're building these solutions in collaborations with these organizations who have to abide by certain timelines, and you're building tools to support them in that rollout as well.
Yeah, no, this is an constant, ongoing sort of decision making point. I mean, more or less agree with everything Karsh said. So I'll just add to other things. One is sort of also educating the partners, the non-technical people, about the nuances of this, right? Unlike traditional software, which can be battle tested before it goes out, and most of the time, even that doesn't work. But most of the time, if you do well, you can get a form to work or you can get a dashboard to work all the time, right? So AI is not like that, is never like that. It is a probabilistic system that if for the same question, one time it might leak a PII and for the other time it might not, right? So now two different sets of users will have a very different understanding of it. So I think it's also, yes, iterative and slow, but also that no matter how slow you go, there are the unknown unknowns, right? So as you start to go out, you will discover people trying to use it in ways that you would have never imagined. I give you an example, which is not generative AI, just to give you a sense of what it is. We worked on uh, helping cotton farmers predict pests, early warning for pests on their farms. And one of the issues there was it has to be offline and on the phone. So we built all that and we worked for many, many months, a big team. And the protocol was supposed to be that they empty the catchment for the pests, put it on a white sheet of paper and take a picture, and then the model will assess and tell you what is your risk for pest attack. Now, users started to use for all sorts of other things, for detecting pests in other crops and pests in other things, or just counting things, and they would say it doesn't work. So it was a failure on our part to not set up the expectation right. And I think with AI, it's even with generative AI, which is even more sort of broad in general, I think thinking very, very deeply about post deployment, how do you gather these unknown unknowns, right? Because there is only so much that a development team or product team can see, but the program teams and the solution team and the end user all have to be somewhat sensitized. I don't want to say re-educated, but I think that's the other aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point, and I think really squarely brings us to the question of like post-deployment evaluation, which I'll pose to the group. But I think something that stuck with me, what you said is like, the users used it for something and they found that it was failing for the use case that they had created in enough for themselves. And so really, I think part of what I'm understanding about responsible AI over this conversation and also through our work is that what the user needs and what the user considered as failure or not is also really critical to consider here. Like you might have your own idea, but then there's something else to be accounted for. And then how do you kind of bridge that gap? Amrita, please chime in.
Yeah, I have something to add to that. We've seen this with our A&M chatbot as well, where, this is part of our high-risk pregnancy training program. So the initial curated knowledge base was very focused on high-risk pregnancy and some basics of antenatal care. And we told A&Ms in the tutorial that you can ask us questions about high-risk pregnancy. And I guess now it seems obvious, but we have a program that focuses on high risk pregnancy, but the A&M has dozens of things she needs to do, right? Her responsibilities are fairly wide and varied. So in her mind, there's no distinction between a high risk pregnancy and a low risk pregnancy, between pregnancy, delivery, postpartum care, immunization, child care. So a job aid is a job aid. And initially, when we first rolled this out in pilot mode, close to 30% of all questions were out of scope. And a lot of users who, got an out of scope message for the first few interactions, the out of scope message said, we cannot answer your question right now. The MT or the medical trainer will respond within 24 hours. So two things happened. One was A&Ms thought this doesn't work because it's not useful. And two, some of them thought they were being admonished. So they saw the escalation message as a failure on their part. So they thought they've done something wrong. So these mental models we'd not fully accounted for, but thankfully we rolled out the chatbot to only 100 users, and we were monitoring all incoming questions. We were following up with users, and now our escalation rates are much lower, so we brought them down from 30% to 6%, and we've expanded the knowledge base quite aggressively.
No, thank you so much for that, Amrita. I think this idea also when we're building these like you've built this escalation message as a way to kind of counteract out of scope queries, which in your mind is like, okay, this is a guardrail against out of scope queries coming in and being answered. But I guess you at that time had not accounted for how this might come across to the user. So we can go in as responsibly as we want, but what that actually plays out in the field is completely different, right? And I'm wondering then, I think this is a good, Amrita, I don't know if you can respond if there was a change to the escalation message in any way that like it was there a difference that you made to that? And then I have a question for Tanisha on this understanding user mental models. So Amrita, if you could start and then I'll pose the question to Tanisha.
Yeah, we've changed the tone a little bit. It's more, we are having trouble right now, so we will get back to you, as opposed to I don't have an answer to this particular question, right? So the
Right.
tone has shifted a little bit. We've also changed our onboarding experience a little bit. Another very interesting insight that we discovered was that our initial tutorial was very focused on features, right? This is how you use the product, and not on value. So not on the specific situations in which ANMs can use the service and how they should compare it with other information sources that they already use. So our new onboarding tackles both of these issues. It talks about it spends more time on the positioning of the product than the features, and we also explicitly say if your question is out of our high risk pregnancy topics, it may take us some time to get back to you. Be patient.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think this change in onboarding is also something that we're seeing amongst organizations as they pilot, iterate, and kind of go forward, right? And we've also seen that when you position just the features, that's when they start only using those features in that way, and there's like a certain perception of it. But it's the way that you position that also, I think, that matters. Asta, please, of course, come in.
Yeah, I think the point that the panelists is making about how environment and existing mental models kind of affect how your tool is perceived and used. I have a very interesting use case that we went through in our initial days. So we, in addition to real time transcription, we also have a dictaphone module, which basically does longer batch transcriptions for judges. And we received a complaint one day from the Karnataka High Court saying that the transcription quality is really bad, and we were so perplexed on exactly what went wrong, because nothing in the model had changed, nothing in the tech had changed, nothing in the product had changed. And we asked them to share the audio with us, and you could see that the audio was recorded from a mic which was at least like 2-3 feet away from the judge's dais. So the environment was not set up perfectly for the tech to kind of capture the audio that was being transcribed. And then that made us realize how much of like just understanding the user's environment, how what day-to-day functions they go through, who's responsible for what. Because in this case, the steno had the software turned on and on their system, and the judge was on their dais, and they were like 2 feet apart, and the system couldn't capture any audio from the judge. So we went back, and like this became like the basis of our trainings. Like this was the first time we thought about on ground trainings and how much we need to index on like just on ground support for our users, because of how new this tech is for them. So yeah, just the thought came to me when everyone else was describing their use cases.
No, like, I mean, I think something that's really come through just through this panel and just work with the social sector organization is that understanding user context is a must. Like, I think also that maybe sometimes there's a tendency because you've worked in the space for so long, there's like this intuitive understanding of how like people will use it or how your end users will use the application. But once you actually build it, position it to them, and then they take it out, it's like a completely different ball game entirely. Something that we've been grappling with at DFL is, as we're seeing this kind of integration of AI into the social sector space, is what that does to kind of the question of trust and over reliance and how that kind of manifests in the field. Tanisha, I was wondering if you could come in and talk about Quest's approach to understanding understanding this particular kind of phenomenon in your young adult learners who, I mean, and you're quite familiar with their context in that they are kind of AI natives, so to speak, right? Like they have an understanding of AI in a specific way that kind of colors the way that they would then come to a product that you are building for them, right? I was wondering if you could talk about the user research that you've done in the development of your specific application, and if you could walk us through the actual specifics of the workshop. So not just the insights, but like what were the activities, questions, or ways in which that you kind of conducted that work.
Sure. Thanks, Asha. I think at the outset, what I'd like to share is, at least from what I've seen in the past, even within, not just the social sector, but everywhere else, when it comes to user research or co-design workshops, a lot of times these exercises are used as validation exercises and not really done at the outset to really shape the fundamentals of your product, right? And I think at Quest, that is something that we hold very close. We do not lead, with use cases and, product designs and, hypothesis. We lead with workshops and research, and that kind of in turn informs the basis of our hypothesis, then which we go on to test and build. So that is something that I just wanted to share, which also is kind of in continuation with the previous, section of conversation. With respect to the specific co-design workshop that we conducted in light of AI tool usage, we already had initial insights on like existing mental models of learners using AI because Quest's Youth Futures Lab had already done like an AI, study and had come up with a charter by young people, right? So we had some initial insights, but what we really wanted to tap into is um, what are the specific questions learners have when they're using AI? What is it that they're feeling when they're using AI? And what is it that they do? What are those decision making junctures when they have these questions? Where do they go? What enables trust in that specific institute or system? When do they drop off and choose an alternate system or tool or person? And what kind of builds that cycle of trust as they, try and discover information or make decisions, right? So let me actually start by just giving you a sense of what we did, because a trust mapping workshop sounds like it's something fancy, but essentially this is something, this was a workshop where we brought around 20, 30 learners from across our ITIs, VTIs to Bangalore for an in-person workshop. This exercise consisted of learners from I think about 8 or 9 different states, and both a mix of male students, female students between the ages of 18 to 25. So just to kind of have some sort of a representation of like the entire ecosystem. And we started with a very simple prompt. What are some real questions that you're sitting with today? Because Ask Hubby intends to support them with questions on employability, skills, and careers, right? So we started with what are some questions that you're sitting with today that are on your mind, real questions that keep you up at night. And what came out of that exercise is there were close to 100 questions that learners had put together individually and in groups that we then mapped, coded, and analyzed. And what struck us immediately was that these weren't all just career questions alone. While career and employment related questions dominated like the data set, what we also saw were questions that were very very personal and intimate, like how can I make my friend laugh when they're sad? um, you know my friend is going through a depressive episode. Can you give me some jokes that I can use to make them feel better? My friend has gone through a breakup, and how can I get them, how can I cheer them up? So these are very personal, intimate questions that learners were asking. And this was important for us to understand because we then realized we are not just building a tool that users are interacting with, we are building a system that will either perpetuate existing like pressure, confusion, fear, or it will kind of help mitigate some of this with confidence, aspiration building, and responsibility, right? So that became very critical to the way that we thought about in context of designing the whole user flow and the journey for Askabi. Yeah, and that was a very important moment for us in terms of understanding the mental models of our users, and even though they were even though they were primed and they had the context of why we are building this tool, right? Irrespective of that, these were still the questions that they were asking, and that is their reality, and we have to work with that reality. So that was one. Another activity that we did was the journey mapping activity, where learners were asked to pick one question as a group of 4 or 5 individuals, which they all resonated with, and we asked them to trace, how they'd gone about gathering information or answers to that question. So I'll give you an example. One question that a student was sitting with was, uh, after completing my vocational training course, I have two career pathways. I have two options that I can take on. Which one do I go ahead with? Do I continue with higher education and specialize in a specific course, or do I take up OGTs, like on the job training, and get into the workforce, right? And then we were asked, okay, what did you first do? So usually the response would be, I went and asked my trainer to help me out with some important, or some kind of direction. And then I went, and then what did you feel at that point? We also asked them to articulate not just who they went to, but what did they feel when they went there. So a lot of them would say, we did not feel satisfied when we got the response. And then why did you not feel satisfied? Because it was not a structured response. And then where did you go? I went online. I went to a GPT. How did you feel then? I felt then, for example, if the response was structured, well articulated, I felt confident because it gave me a very clear picture of, what exists, and it also told me what I can do next. So we made them like map this entire journey of when they first had the problem, all the different avenues they approached to solve that problem, which kind of responses and avenues help build trust, which kind of avenues and responses eroded trust in that existing system. And then these patterns emerged, which were honestly quite striking, because for us as product builders, we were quite humbled. We realized that young people don't really trust any single source of information. As much as we'd like to believe that they don't. And they do try and triangulate all of this information that they receive, right? So one learner described asking her mother first, and then when she was not satisfied, she went to her network, or like her peer group, and then she searched online, and this was very interesting. She said, GPT gave me a list of 10 colleges, 10 top colleges to pursue that specific course. But the reason I didn't go with those 10 colleges is because all of those colleges required for me to move out of my hometown. And I needed something that was within my hometown. So eventually she ended up taking a decision based on what someone in her community had recommended to her. And this is an important insight, right? Because what this really tells us is, while uh, again, it kind of not only validated our understanding of why we need a contextualized, localized tool that has complete understanding of their reality, it also made us realize that, it's important for a tool to ask follow-up questions, which a lot of these AI tools don't do today. You give them any question without any context, they'll give you an answer, and they'll give you a very comprehensive answer. So, the need for asking follow-up questions, the need for engaging in conversation became all the more crucial to the way that we were designing Ask Kabhi. And that kind of featured in a lot of the conversations and how we were building the intelligence and behavioral architecture. Um, and I think we did a bunch of other exercises as well, but I think what I'd like to just highlight on, I also understand that we may be overshot of time, is, towards the end of this workshop, we did like a simple co-design activity where we asked learners to articulate in their own words individually what AI should do and should not do. And it was so interesting. There were about 180 odd statements that came out of this exercise in their own words, where learners had clearly articulated things that they want AI to do. And it was surprising because this was not really like a list of features that you normally get, right, when you go and ask learners. It was really about very nuanced ways of how AI works. Like, I don't want misleading translations, I don't want any wrong data, I don't want AI to make me lazy. These were actually things that they were saying. Ha mein ha nahi milana. So ha mein ha nahi milana is like, if I have to translate, is I don't want an AI tool that is just going to agree with everything that I say. So, this actually helped us. And I think the best thing that came out of this is, towards the end of this exercise, our participants actually built an AI manifesto which is something we had never actually outlined as an objective of this workshop, or even thought that this is something we will get. But they actually designed a very clear manifesto, and they shared it with us. This is what we want with AI. This is exactly what we need right now, and that really formed the basis of what we're doing today. And which is why I feel like these kind of co-design workshops, user research practices are not optional. I think the assumption that these are optional, these are validating exercises, we already have enough insights. I think you'd be surprised every time we go to the field and talk to learners, talk to educators, talk to our beneficiaries, right? They will come up with new ideas and insights that comes from their lived realities. And so this workshop, for example, not only helped validate some of the design decisions that we were taking for how we want to build AI, but it also um, helped us zero in on fundamental constraints and guardrails that we definitely want to build on using AI. Yeah, I'll just pause there.
No, yeah, thank you so much, Tanisha. I think that really kind of goes back to that question of understanding user context, but at what point do you understand that? It's not like you said, like a validation exercise. It is something to consider at the beginning of the process and really integral to this sort of like responsible AI guardrailing, and not really thinking about it as something to kind of confirm your biases or whatever, or to see how they would use a tool. But I think more and more we're going to see that it's going to be really important to understand perceptions of AI and attitude towards AI as this becomes more and more mainstream, because that kind of narrative is filtering down to communities of users at that level. And so I think really important to see, and thank you so much for kind of like delineating what those activities were, what those kind of follow-up questions were to kind of amount to that. Steph, you had a question. I don't know if you were going to ask the sort of rounding us off question for
Yeah,
now,
no,
but
I'm sorry. I'm going to be a bit of a party pooper here and kind of jump in and say we're out of time. Just obviously want to make sure that we respect people's time. And we've come to the end and we've kind of gone 5 minutes over. We did start 5 minutes later. But thank you so much to all of you. I think it was pretty clear there was so much to discuss that even 90 minutes is just not enough. So if you don't mind, Sasha, can I ask you to just wrap up with a couple of lines, and then I'll kind of wrap this all up and lead us into the next session. So over to you, Sasha, as the chair for the
yeah.
last words.
No, thank you so much. And first, I just want to say thank you to all our panelists. I know I sent over a very exhaustive document of questions for you to answer, which you did in your own like kind of presentations and in the follow up after that. But I'm sure there's a lot of fodder for just more conversations after, and there's I'm sure like a live discussion as well. If you wanted to share any of your work, feel free to put it there. But thank you so much, I think, for coming onto the panel and really reinstating that. Slow is better. Like yes, the model capabilities are kind of rushing ahead, and there's a pressure to kind of jump onto that bandwagon. But I think to really do the sort of work where we are strategically and responsibly putting out tools that are actually useful to these users and not adding to their burden, and that really are contextualized to their environment, requires like slow iterative deliberation at every turn, and not just during the process, like Tanisha said, like in this sort of validation way, but also like from the get-go, really understanding that. And I think your organizations really exemplify that. And like for Tattle and for Art Park to be the sort of like technical support organizations that come in, I think that's also like a really interesting space to be grappling with this alongside these organizations who face very different pressures from these organizations as well. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for those who stayed on for the panel, and thank you to the organizing team for tapping DFL to moderate this conversation.
No, thank you so much, Sasha. And there is that common theme from this morning session around the kind of deeply nuanced context that all these different projects need to work in, and that slow iterative development. I think one of the key takeaways for me is I like that question of what does a user define as success or failure, as opposed to what you as the creator or the organization behind it. So thank you so much to Sasha for convening that amazing panel. Thank you so much to all our speakers, and thank you so much to the audience who stayed with us. Sorry we were a bit late. We're back in 23 minutes. Up next, we have another incredible panel. It's all incredible panels today. Please don't miss any. Curated by Masakani, titled Shaping AI in Africa, Power, Practice, and Possibility, with a fantastic lineup of speakers. It's bringing together voices from across the Masakani ecosystem to take an honest look at where things stand and where they need to go. If you have any reflections on this session, please do engage on the live discussion. We'll drop that link in the chat, and also the link to register for the next session if you haven't already. Amina's dropped that link. And once again, thank you so much to Sasha, Tanisha, Asta, Barish, Amrita, and Jigar for their time today. And yeah, please hit them up on the community for questions. Sorry we didn't get to ask that question that was in the chat, but thank you so much, everyone, and have a good rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you.